Hello everyone, this is Caillou, and I'm back to make a video on the Primordial format. So what is Primordial? So Primordial is a custom format in which you take any set, choose two rares, six uncommons, and any number of commons, make a 40 card deck out of it, and then play against other people's decks. Um, so the idea is it's supposed to emulate the gameplay of Limited, but the deck building control of Constructed. So today I'm here with MoxProxy and Plipster,
Hey,
Hi,
how you
so
and
guys doing?
Plipster.
and
And
we're gonna
I'm
be
MoxProxy.
yeah, and we're gonna be talking about one of the recent decks which has been doing well in the format, Zendikar Rising Black Red Party Aggro. So I guess the first thing is, I think Plipster was the first one to build this deck. So I want to ask like, which cards or like what was your initial idea behind building this deck?
So I built this deck. This is the first deck I built when I came in the format, and it's right after I was in a Horizon draft because it's a really great format. And I was like, I want to play more with these cards. And I had just trophied with a VR Party Aggro because it's a very good archetype in like the common support was really there, and I just thought if I could like make an ideal draft list, what would it be? And so the core of this deck is really there are four creatures you have in your party. There are four target types. If you're not familiar with Zenic Rising, are Rogue, Cleric, Wizard, and Warrior, and your party like bonus scales based on how many of these you have. So your Rogue is also your one drop, and that's going to be Sneaking Guide, which is a single red or a Goblin that can make small things unblockable. This is the least exciting for your party creatures, but it's the only one that like costs one mana, and it's your only rogue. So even though it's not like a great card by any standard, you really need it to fill out your synergies. And where you really start to see those is the two drop slot. You have your clerics and your warriors. The cleric is Malakir Blood Priest, which is a 2/1 cleric, and it drains your opponent for X, where X is the number of creatures in your party. This card is really great as a late game reach, where you can frequently just play 2/1s that drain your opponent for 3 or 4 and burn them out quickly. And your other two drop is Grotag Bugcatcher, which is one in a red, 1/2 trample Goblin Warrior, and when it attacks, it pumps itself +1/+0 for each creature in your party. So this is going to frequently be attacking as a 4/2 or even a 5/2, which is exceptional rate at common, and that's one of the biggest draws. And topping off the party curve is Ardent Electromancer, which is 2 in a red for a human wizard. That's the fourth of your types. It's a 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield, it adds a red mana for each creature in your party. And so those are the four core components. You run four of all of those, and I don't think you can really cut any of them. Then you just fill out the deck with some removal, some good uncommon, some mercs. But that's really the key of what makes it work is this one drop, two drop, three drop curve. And Electromancer, since it adds mana, it lets you double or even triple spell on turn 3. And that, like the tempo boost that that generates, is often enough to carry the game. So it's the combination of those four cards that really makes the deck tick.
I would say that in addition to those four cards, you also have some exceptionally good finishers. Yeah, you've got Shatter Skull Minotaur and Zagras is how you pronounce his name. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Zagras, Thief of
Zagras, Thief of
Heartbeat.
Heartspeeds. They both have haste. Zagrath, that guy, the guy whose name starts with a Z, he gives all your guys Death Touch, which means they can blow through walls and Merfolk Secret Keepers, etc. Yeah, they're both exceptional finishers, and I think without them, the deck would just be very good. But with them, it's exceptional. It's up to that A or S tier.
Yeah. Um, so the key about both of these, there's six drops, but they have a cost reducer. They reduce their cost by one for each creature in your party. And so these can come out on turn 4 or 5. Zagras has flying, and Minotaur's is 5/4 haste, and they can start swinging extremely quickly. Special about the Minotaur is that since it only costs red, there's actually a curve in the deck you can do that happens semi-frequently, which is turn 1 Sneaking Guy, which is a 1/1 rogue. Turn 2, play one of your party's two drops, so either a Bugcatcher or Blood Priest. And then turn 3, you play Electromancer, and that's you're going to have a Cleric, Rogue, and Wizard, or Cleric, Warrior, Wizard, Rogue. So that's 3 types. So when Electromancer comes in, it adds 3 mana. And now your Shatter Skull Minotaur, which normally costs 6, gets reduced by 3, and you can pay for it immediately with your 3 from the Electromancer. So on turn 3, you can attack for 10 damage if the 2-drop is a bug catcher and you have played 4 cards, and your opponent is just so far behind that you kill them in like 2 or 1 turns. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I would say the best hand you could possibly have for this deck would be turn 1 Sneaking Guide, turn 2 Bug Catcher, turn 3 like 2 or 3 Ardent Electromancers, followed by a um, Shadow Skull Minotaur, and then it's just, oops, I win. It doesn't really matter what your opponent is doing.
Yeah, and it's like the control decks in the format just cannot keep up for the most part because there are control decks with 4 mana wipes, but then you usually only have one copy of them, so you have to get really lucky to draw into them. And you also have to at that point start to contend with like your opponent can still like the party player can still rebuild with like Royal Eruptions and Malakirs to just drain you out. So
Yeah.
even if you somehow answer their huge board, they're very much not down and out.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
so
the last
we've
components of
talked a
this
lot
deck.
about how good the deck is, but I want to know like specifically because both of you have or like Plipster ran this in the tournament, MoxProxy has run it in the league. So uh, in both of those like competitive events, how has it performed? What matchups have you played against, and how did each of those feel? And I think since Plipster started off the last question, let's start off with MoxProxy for this one, and then we'll go to Plipster.
Definitely. It's felt really good in the league so far. I think the main terror of this format, or the best deck in the format for a long time, has been the mono blue Eldraine Mill deck because it can just go way over the top of all the other control decks, and really anything that doesn't kill fast enough with all its bounce and walls from the Merfolk Secret Keepers. It can just stall out the game and then mill people to death. And Party performs really, really well into that specific matchup. Not only because Zagra gives things Death Touch, which means they can kill the Secret Keepers, but also because everything in the deck pretty much likes to be bounced. If you bounce one of our big hasty finishers, then it doesn't really matter. We can just play it and attack immediately the next turn. If you bounce Ardent Electromancer, then you can basically just play him again for free with almost no loss of mana. If you bounce Malakir Blood Priest, that's just extra damage coming right at you. And so it's felt really really good into that deck. And in terms of most of the other decks I've faced in League, none of them can really compete with the speed offered by some of the more explosive turns. The only games I've lost in League have not been because my opponent was on a deck that countered this. They've really just been because I didn't draw the right colored mana, which happens sometimes in this format.
Yeah, a big issue with the format as a whole, and also this deck is there's not very much fixing at all in Zendikar, and you're an aggro deck, so you want to be playing like 15 lands, and so there are games where you just don't draw your blocks first. And so you mitigate that by leaning heavily on red. Your only 2 black cards in the main deck are the Blood Priest and your Zagras Rare, and that's also part of the reason why Thwart the Grave, which is one of the best cards in Zendikar Rising Limited for Party, doesn't show up here. It's because the double black cost, and also because you're like a very different, even though it's inspired by Zendikar Rising Limited decks, you're actually a very different like style because you in Zendikar Rising Limited you can like go long in addition to going fast, and here you're a much more focused narrow deck. You aren't going to wait until you have 2 creatures in the graveyard because at that point you're like already pretty far behind, and For the Grave won't help you. So that's why that's like one of the mythic uncommons isn't showing up here. Um, as for matchups, though, there have been some rough ones. The 2 that I lost in the tournament were Cycling and also a very interesting green black Luris deck. And the key thing about both of those is they can produce a very large amount of trump blockers in a way that is hard to deal with for a party. Um, your only evasive creatures are Bug Catcher and grass. And so if Cycling can land a turn 2 Valiant Rescuer and then just cycle every turn, unless you kill that immediately, the 1/1s are going to block your stuff, and there's no way for your aggro deck to get through that. And the green black deck has this one drop that tutors out extra copies of itself also. So that's one of the biggest weaknesses is jump blockers
Oh, you
for
mean
this
Whisper
deck.
Squad?
Whisper Squad, yes, that's a key card in the green black deck, and that was very much an issue for party. So it's not like the deck has no weaknesses, but overall, I think against Mill, it is quite strong. Mill does have some tools that can deal with it. Mentioned, although a lot of your cards do like being bounced, it's still a very effective tempo tool when they block one of your creatures with Secret Keeper and they let them island through, and then they bounce the Secret Keeper and your creature. So they're able to, at base of very little, like they don't lose any card advantage really. They get to mill again with a Secret Keeper, and they like shut down two of your biggest attacks. It's very, very irritating. But so it's not really like a full 100-0 matchup. It's closer to 60-40, which I think that's still a huge draw for Mill, which is one of the most heavily played and the best decks to be 60-40 or even higher than that is one of the reasons you want to play this deck.
I think it might actually be higher than that because I faced you in the tournament and I was playing Mill and you were playing this deck, and I actually did that
Yeah.
that tempo play that you described a number of times where I would bounce my Merfolk Secret Keeper and also your biggest threat, um, and you still I think 2-1'd me or 2-0. You just ran me over.
Like I think I dropped like games to Mill, but I don't think I've dropped a full match yet. Mill matchup is maybe even 70-30 or something.
Yeah.
It's very good.
But yeah, that's interesting what you said about cycling because I maybe with the reason that I haven't encountered any bad matchups is because I haven't played against anyone who has just repeatable uh, chump blockers, the way that I guess a
Yeah.
Whisper Squad or a cycling deck would have if the cycling deck gets the right card.
Yeah, but
Cling runs worse.
even versus chump blockers, you can like the Malakir Blood Priest is a strong tool. Royal Eruption is a strong tool. So as long as you can get some damage in early, I think the thing with cycling is really just Zenith Flare and Granite Healer providing incidental life gain makes your reach options like far less attractive. And also, I think the Lures deck has that Boot Nipper, which puts a lifelink counter on itself. So
Is
yeah,
the worst if you can recur it with Loris. You're a pretty removal light deck because you're aggro. You play 3 or 4 Royal Eruption's main deck. Um, and actually, let's talk about the like differences between our lists because there are aside from the core of like the party creatures and the Royal Eruptions, there are and the Minotaurs. There's some different options for what you want to put as the uncommon and the rare slots.
Definitely. And also, I do want to mention, I know we talked a little bit about how one of the smaller weaknesses of the deck was that two color decks in this format generally have a harder time getting all the
Yeah.
right mana if they don't go long. But this deck, with things like Spikefield Hazard or Black Boom Rogue or any of the modal land flip things, what are they called?
MDFC's
yeah,
modal double face
MDFCs.
cards.
Yeah.
Any of the MDFCs, it helps a lot. So this has those options also that most aggro decks, two color aggro decks especially, won't be able to have.
So the funny thing is, even though the modal double face cards they're like lower power and they're less energy than a lot of the uncommons. Like there are some very, very high synergy, high power uncommons. There's one equipment that like pumps your creatures for party. There's a flame tongue kavu that works for party, and there's a like that can Thoughtseize if you have a big enough party. But you're because your common slots are so dedicated like and filled up with party creatures, right? You have very little room for actual lands, so you actually need to like sacrifice some of your uncommon slots. So these spell lands that can work as both if you want to meet like the 15 land requirement for it to like just play magic. So the various MDFC options, I think the three or maybe 4 like most prominent and best ones are Spikefield Hazard, which is attach mountain on one side and it's a single red, deal 1 damage to any target, exile that target if it would die. The other, this card is huge. I think this is the MDFC you definitely want to be running 2 of. There's so many creatures in the format that have 1 toughness or heater move versus like cycling, right? If this can like stop their turn 1 Fox or their turn 2 Valiant Rescuer, that's great. And it even exiles it so Lurrus can't bring it back. And also it goes face, which is just always nice to have your lands do a little bit of burn. The other three, though, are kind of up for debate as to which ones you want to include. What are your thoughts on Malakir Rebirth versus Black Boom Rogue versus Kazul's Fury?
I had in my list. I definitely agree on the that Spike Field Hazard is a two of. I had in my list one Black Boom Rogue in the main, and then one Kazul's Fury and one Rebirth in the sideboard, just to be able to switch it up.
Yeah,
I haven't encountered that many situations. Like Malakir Rebirth looks really great, but having to, I think against some decks that either don't run removal or run removal as enchantments, um, etc. Like against Mill, it would just be a completely dead card and a black card, which is not necessarily what
yeah.
we want. So I
Um,
think Malakar Rebirth might be better just to start in the sideboard because not
Interesting.
everyone runs removal.
I've actually won several games off the back of it because there's a really cool play you can do where you attack into them and they block your Malakir Blood Priest, and you can cast a Rebirth. And what that does is the Blood Priest dies, and then
Hmm.
it comes back to the battlefield. It doesn't just get indestructible. So you can actually re-trigger the drain, and you can put them in a situation where, like, if they don't block it, they take two and they die. And if they do block it, you rebirth it and then they die. And so it can provide some nice reach in those scenarios, and it always feels really good to do that. But I think you're right in that versus some matchups, although those are ones where you're generally favored like Mill, it's not as strong.
That's true.
Um,
And I think
Black
you are
Boom
right
Rogue,
about that. Go ahead. Black
is
Boom
the
Rogue?
2/3, right? It will almost never have the you get +3/+0 because you're not milling your opponent or putting their cards into the graveyard actively. And so for the most part, it's a 3 mana, 2/3 mana switch is pretty good actually. In a late game situation where you're top decking, just getting an extra creature can be very nice. And the upside to Kazul's Fury is that it's the most reach because it's a fling for 3 mana, and so it's in a situation where they're like chump blocking your 5 for a Minotaur or something, you can draw that and throw it at their face for lethal. So those are the three options when you're looking at MDFCs. So two uncommons are going to be Spikefield Hazards. Uh, you're going to want the other four to have two of them are going to be Shatterskull Minotaur, and the other two can either be other MDFCs or there's one other uncommon in those slots that you can try out, and it's called Thundering Spark Mage, which is the Splint on Kavu. Like it's a wizard 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to target creature where X is your party size. I just think this is in some matchups you just really need the removal, and it's a thing that can deal with larger threats, and it's also just a very large tempo play.
Definitely. I think it should definitely be a one of in every main board. I think whether or not you need a second copy is debatable and kind of depends on the meta.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that. And I think the last like difference between our main boards was Shatterskull Smashing versus Leyline Tyrant. I think you might be right about running Leyline Tyrant because that's 4 mana 4/4 flyer and it's a dragon, and you can pay red to like deal. I think it has like this Krufix text where red mana doesn't empty from your pool, and when it dies, you can pay any mana red to deal damage. So this is just a 4 mana 4 flyer that burns your opponent when it dies, and that's just a very good card. I had
Yeah,
chosen not to include it for synergy, and also because it was kind of expensive, and I also because I wanted to play some non-lands in the uncommon slot, I need to fit some lands in the rare slot. But I think it might just be correct to go with the rare and cut like a Royal Eruption for a land instead.
yeah. It's basically either your opponent it turns the game into gold or go fish. If they've managed to like slow you down and stall you out, you just drop that and they either have an answer or they lose because it just provides an immense amount
Yeah,
of reach,
for sure. I
which
think a
which feels good.
consideration that neither of us have tried yet, but if you wanted to like innovate on the Skyclave Shade is one of the best aggro cards in Zendikar Rising, and I played with it in a draft, and I really did well from it. I'm considering adding it here, which is a 3/1, can't block, but it has landfall. You can cast it from your graveyard, and so this is a recursive threat, which is big for this deck. And so if you can play this on turn 2, you're applying the pressure, and you can just continue applying pressure even after they remove it. And so I think something that sticks around, the removal could be valuable versus certain matchups.
I like that. Yeah. I might try that out in my next build. It could be correct to have Leyline Tyrant in the sideboard in case you are running up against things where you need a lot of reach, and then just have Skyclave Shade in the main board.
Thoughts on the sideboard, actually, because I've built several sideboards for this deck, and I haven't been happy with any of them.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, the deck
I
feels like
think,
it's
you're
linear
gonna
enough,
want, like,
plus like
some-
land hungry enough that like it's like how many cards can you reasonably like side out without like hampering the deck's main game plan?
Exactly it.
And,
So
and like
we're
sometimes you would like
dealing with Aggro.
yeah like what are you hedging your bets against? Like you're just trying to go for like your nuttiest draw and most
Yeah.
matchups, and that should be enough to win.
Mm-hmm.
so
I think the main things that I've sideboarded out have just been. I think in my last, I actually had a number of different, because you're usually just sideboarding out. Your commons are pretty much locked. I
Yeah.
had 3 Royal Eruptions in the main and then 2 Feed the Swarm in the sideboard in case I wanted to swap out some of the Royal Eruptions in case I needed to deal with.
Really useful tool for. I always keep thinking I want to bring in a feed for decks where Royal Eruption can't hit their creatures, right? If they're like playing a bunch of 4 toughness things. But then I remember Royal Eruption goes face, and that's like way better than feed, and so I never do that. But if there's a deck with like a really problematic enchantment that like shuts me down, or a creature that I really need to answer, then some feeds will come in. Also, there's a nice toolbox of MBFC options in your sideboard. Like you can have like one of each of the ones we mentioned, and I think just
Mhm.
bringing the one that fits your game plan the most. So that's I've considered. I tried out Molten Blast on the sideboard as artifact destruction. It's terrible. Don't do it.
Yeah.
It costs 3. You
I
just
agree
never
with that.
bring it in.
I
Even
also
against
tried that
deck
out.
with Ensnaring Bridge, right? I
Mhm.
played right. I think there's a player who are going into this weird mono black control deck with Ensnaring Bridge, and if you're against Ensnaring Bridge, you all but lose the game. You cannot attack. And you unless you like draw into your reach, and
Yeah.
that deck also plays some like big life gain effect. So if they get out of
I think you're cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, Plipster, you're cutting out a lot.
Are you there, man?
Rest in peace, Plipster. But well, I think anyways we were getting. Oh yeah, Plipster's disconnected. Oh, disconnecting, reconnecting.
Oh, he's coming back.
trying to call.
Hey, welcome back.
Okay, cool. But yeah, I think regardless, I think we were just about getting to the end of, or like the end of what I had planned to discuss.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Any like final comments you guys want to give about the deck?
I did want to just mention for the sideboard, because you had yeah, and I agree that you don't need to run Molten Blast at all. And I think against that deck, you can also see the power of just having like one of each modal thing in your sideboard, because you can bring in like Pelka Predation
Yeah.
in place of like
So
a Black
good.
Bloom Rogue or something, and that can also steal their life gain and give you a lot more time to just deal for the top. And that would also be a matchup where you could bring in
A lot of good MBFC
Leyline
options.
Tyrant.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think just also talking about Zendikar Rising in general, this isn't the only viable Zendikar Rising deck. Zendikar Rising is an extremely powerful set for this for Primordial, and I've had success with a variety of archetypes. You can play clerics, you can play landfall, you can play wizards. Wizards isn't that great because
I love your kicker deck.
but there are a lot of I made a kicker deck. You can like any of the 2-color archetypes basically are really supported, and it's because I think Wizards like their design philosophy has gone a lot more towards like synergy and rewarding that, and I think it's really fun. But also, Primordial enables these more synergy focused, like powerful constructed decks because synergy in draft is like something you have to work for. But if you can just like take all the synergy pieces and put them together, that really makes like these like
things they've been pushing for draft, way more exciting Primordial. And so be on the lookout for like every new set. There will probably be like a good Primordial deck in there. All the time. I'm not sure what the themes are, but I think based on the recent pattern, right, so many good Primordial decks have been coming from sets like Ikoria and Undercar Rising. So
Yeah, and I
just
think the
keep your eyes
difference is
peeled for
just like
spoilers.
the quality of commons has gone up by so much, and like when your
Yeah,
commons are
definitely. The
pulling the weight
removal
of your
and
rares, like
neutral.
because usually like the thing is like when your commons are bombs in and of themselves, it's like okay, cool. That's like the main building block of my deck. Unlike some of the other previous decks where it's like, well, I have filler commons that kind of do a fine job, but I really just need to draw into like my big bomb rare, and it's like here this deck is just like it doesn't even like you could never see your rares. You could maybe even never see your uncommons and still run down a bunch of decks,
For sure.
and that's like the
Yeah,
real power of it.
if I could run a few extra commons or uncommons instead of that like second rare in this deck, I absolutely would.
Yeah. The second, well, yeah, no, the second
I
rare is a
think
bit
like
of a liability, and that's why I just
yeah.
put in Shatter Skull Smashing, which is like basically a mountain in this deck.
Hmm.
Is how much I like. I just rather have Royal Eruption. Royal Eruption's so good.
Yeah. How do you feel about Soul Shatter? Which is each
Rare.
opponent sacrifices a creature or
I don't feel
planeswalker with
great
the
about it.
highest converted mana cost. What'd you say?
I think if you want unconditional removal, you'd just rather have Feed the Swarm, which is cheaper, and like I'm not sure how many things that are indestructible or hexproof they need to get around, and also
Yeah.
takes. I'm not sold on that.
I think it's felt pretty good
If
for me
you
just
aggro
because
in the format though,
go on. It's felt pretty good for me just because it doesn't have the weakness of Feed the Swarm, which is that it has to compete for a common slot.
oh,
I think that actually the second rare slot is less valuable than the slot
honestly
that Feed the Swarm has to compete
I'm
for.
going to agree on that. I think yeah, I just plugged in Shadow Smashing, which honestly did practically nothing. It was a mountain. I think that might just be the best option. It just put a mountain in your rare slot. Call it a day. If you want to play a different aggro deck, though, this is far from your only option. We're not going to talk about them here, but Zenicar Rising Landfall is very potent. If you like, it's sort of a combo-ish aggro deck where you play a bunch of creatures that get +2/+2 on landfall, and then play some cards that ramp out lands, and you can like pump your board +6/+6 and swing in 15. There are other very good decks though. Amonkhet has specifically. I don't think Amonkhet Remastered is like part of this, but the original Amonkhet, not Hour of Devastation, has a very good red-white Exert aggro deck, and also Eldraine has a yet untested Seven Dwarves aggro deck that I'm sure has potential. So
The Seven
don't
Dwarfs
just
aggro deck
copy our
is
deck. Feel free to go out there and make your own. And I think maybe you could be the next one in this video. I'm talking
Yeah.
about how you broke the format because there are so many decks out there.
Lightning Bolt is legal in a lot of core sets, and I have yet to make a good deck with it, but
It is.
the potential exists.
okay.
All right,
Yeah, and I think that's a good note to
that's
end
pretty
on.
much all I have to say.
Just like noting that Primordial is a cool format because you can brew lots of cool shit, and I think that's what got me into it in the first place, and I'm glad that other people are enjoying it for the same reasons. But yeah,
Yeah.
um, so thank you both for joining me. This was super dope.
Thank you.
Um, and until next time, this is Caillou signing off.